Gentleman on the phone with us right now, Frank Rizzo, who is a former pilot, or Fred Rizzo rather. Fred, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Can you just tell us your experience as a pilot? What kind of planes did you fly? Can you give us some background?
I've flown, Part 121, 135, and Part 91, so scheduled and private and charter. This looks like it was a Hopper-jet charter aircraft, Challenger 604.
Yes.
That was on its third leg for the day.
Mm-hmm. And have you ever flown a plane, one of the Challenger 604s?
I have not flown the Challenger 604. I fly a Citation Sovereign currently.
Okay. So when you hear someone has lost both engines on approach to an airport like this, what are the first things that goes through your mind as to what could have possibly caused both engines to go?
Fuel exhaustion is the first thing that comes into mind. And I guess possible bird strike, but most likely fuel exhaustion is, from my opinion.
And just to be clear, fuel exhaustion, you mean running out of fuel?
Affirmative, yeah. I mean, if they were flying, it looks like their flight was Fort Lauderdale to Ohio State back to Naples, and then it looked like a reposition or a flight to Fort Lauderdale Executive, where the main headquarters is for Hopper-jet. So depending on what their fuel quantity was, it could have been fuel exhaustion. I mean, that's speculating. That's all. That's all you can really do at this point.
That's right. We're all really speculating at this point. We recently just talked to a gentleman who is a retired firefighter. He speculated that he didn't intend to land on that interstate at all, that he was probably going to one of the nearby country clubs where he saw some open space. Maybe it would have been a safer place for him to land, and just didn't quite make it. Can you tell me what kind of training do you have? This pilot was so calm as he was making his call into the tower that he was going to be making an emergency landing. Can you tell us about your training for something like this when it happens?
Well, I'll tell you that federal regulations require all captains to be Part 135, which is most likely what this plane was flying under. Part 135. Every 6 months, the captain needs to go in for training, and the co-pilot would be every 12 months. And what you do in training is specifically train for the emergencies, for the engine fires, for the pressurization failures, for forced landings. Now, for a double engine failure, that's like the last thing you train for, because that's one of the most situations that you hardly ever see, ever. I mean, the only one that we're familiar with is the commercial airline that landed in the Hudson.
Right.
So this is a very, very rare situation.
To get back to something you talked to about a minute ago, as a complete novice here, someone who would have no idea how to fly a plane, explain how, I understand how running out of fuel could cause both engines to fail. How would a bird strike, if in fact that is true, cause both engines to fail?
Well, normally, if you've got bird ingestion and you're getting it through both engines, it just rips up the front end and the back end of the engine. I mean, it just tears through it and everything gets mangled. Usually, it's not an immediate cut off of power. You'll get some compressor stalls and you'll get a bunch of banging and you'll get smoke out the end. So it's why it would be interesting to see if there's any video prior to it, hitting the highway. But those are the only situations that I can think of at the moment: is bird strikes, fuel exhaustion. It would be interesting to see what the cockpit voice recorder had to say.
Correct.
And also, that would be probably the primary. And this particular airplane does have a cockpit voice recorder along with the data recorder, so they'll be able to get all the information within the coming weeks.
And presumably other pilots. Now this is a busy airport this time of year. A lot of private planes coming and going from the Naples airport. So presumably other planes might also see birds in the area if there's some sort of migration going on. It's not one bird necessarily. It could be more than one bird, and it could be reported as well. Correct?
Well, a lot of the times when you're flying in on an approach, the tower will say, in their ATIS, which is advisory for weather, birds in the vicinity. And a lot of times you'll see a whole migration of birds flying along at a certain altitude, and usually pilots will mention, I've got birds spotted at 1,000 feet or 500 or the like. So that would be something else that the FAA would be looking at, is control tower talking to this particular flight, and prior to this flight, if there was any indications of birds in the area.
Okay, we've also heard some reports from other aircraft that were approaching, told to clear the area. So they must have had some, as the birds fly through the live picture we're looking at right now on the interstate. How ironic
Right.
that that's happening right now. But as we hear from these other aircrafts, if a tower knows a plane is coming in that may be having some sort of distress, what happens if you're in the air also on approach or about to leave? What are the instructions you would hear?
Well, if you're flying in and you've got an emergency, right away you're going to say Mayday, Mayday, declaring an emergency, and at that point the skies open up. You are cleared as the PIC, pilot in command of that aircraft, to do whatever you need to do to get the plane safely on the ground. The control tower is going to advise everybody to get out of the way, land any runway. The airport is yours. So I'm sure when he declared emergency or told the tower, he was going down, that he just cleared the area for him to get where he needed to go and hopefully get to the runway.
That's exactly
Obviously,
what the
didn't make
tower,
that.
yes, that's exactly what the tower traffic appeared to be. They also called an Alert 3 in progress, which, if I understand this correctly, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's a crash of some type in progress, whether near the airport or on the airport. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not sure. I've never heard of the term Alert 3, and, maybe that's just me. But what happens normally is if there's an incident at the airport or around the airport, they'll shut down the airport. So as soon as this airplane was forced down on the highway, that airport was closed. So there would be no traffic taking off or landing at that point. Depending on where the crash is, in a couple of hours or an hour or so, they'll resume normal operations at the airport. But as soon as this incident happened, the airport was closed down. I would have to, bet on that.
Fred,
without a problem.
Here's a question that somebody watching is asking. We're looking at the fire and the flames. If the fuel was exhausted, would the fire have been that big and had that much black smoke?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. What happens is, I don't know if this plane, I'm not sure if this plane was landing or taken off, to be honest with you, because I haven't done enough research on it.
From what we
I guess I could
understand, it
look
was
at real
landing.
quick.
From what we understand, it was landing.
All right, so if it was landing, yeah, I can see it right now. If it was landing, then that's, it looks like the plane had been flying for about 2.5 hours. No, 4.5 hours. So I'm just looking at it real quick. That's about 4.5 hours. So it all depends. There'll be a little bit of fuel in the airplane, but it's possible. And if it crashed and if it was full of fuel, that thing basically would have gone up immediately. The fact that you have pictures of people driving by and there's a small little fire, and then it gets worse and worse after a while. There wasn't a lot of fuel on there, probably. I'm, speculating again.